Slater Crusaders, welcome to the show. Happy Friday. Coming up, we're going to talk with our friend Rob Henderson. He's got this great new newsletter about human nature. It's pretty cool. We've got some other stuff to talk about with him. He's got a new article in the Wall Street Journal. But first, impeachment will probably, thank goodness, end today, and Trump will come out the victor. As we've said from day one, it's so surreal to watch this whole process unfold when everyone knows with 100% certainty that the president will not be removed from office. But we do this whole charade anyway. It's very odd. I keep reading articles, and they're super serious, inside the Beltway articles and building up the drama and blah, blah. And you get like 3/4 of the way through, and they'll throw in some sentence like, even though Trump is all but guaranteed to be acquitted at the end of the trial. And I was like, well, then why are we doing this? What's the point of this whole thing? And it's all because Pelosi, well, the media wants the drama for some reason, because it's not even dramatic, but Pelosi wants to hang a scarlet letter I for impeachment around Trump's neck during re-election, thinking that will help the Democrats. She said as much the other day, that he'll always be the impeached president. But she didn't think it through, because he's also always going to be an acquitted president, and therefore a victorious president. And you will have lost again, Nancy. And not only that, but you've emboldened his supporters. Same thing with Don Lemon, that whole controversy the other day, laughing at Trump supporters, right? Do you think any Trump supporter or even any moderate watched that clip and said, you know what? Don Lemon makes a pretty good point. I am an idiot. I think I'll vote for Bernie Sanders now. Like that didn't happen one time. And it's all it did was cement the idea that it's Trump supporters versus the world. And it just emboldens his support. This picture that Trump sent out a couple weeks ago says it all. I love this. This picture was so good. I forget even the context of when he sent this out. It may have been the impeachment, I don't know. But that's it. That's true. And that's how everyone feels. And the media never figured it out. All they needed to do was to cover Trump moderately fairly. Or really, just not even at all. Just ignore him for the most part. But the media couldn't help themselves. They couldn't stop going after him every single turn, just making the divide, Trump supporters versus the world, even further. I would argue that the media absolutely helped Trump win the presidency in 2016 with all the free press coverage. I'll never forget, we were commenting on this back in 2016. I'd be doing the radio show, and we'd have the TV screens in front of us. And it would say, there'd be the podium, the Trump podium, and it would say, like, text Trump to whatever, and the website. And the MSNBC and CNN would say, Trump speaking soon. And it would be up there for hours. like the speech would be at 1, and at 11:30, every news goes to this podium and just gives him an hour of free press coverage with his logo and the whole thing right there. I was like, well, these guys, they're just handing him this thing. And I think they're going to do the same here. They're handing it to him with all the negative coverage. It just makes Trump stronger. Jesse Kelly, the other day, he was on the show, and he said this about Trump and the black vote.
The truth of the matter is Donald Trump's going to get a higher percentage of the black vote than a Republican has for a long, long, long time. I mean, that community has really started to embrace him as much as they embrace any Republican. And to be honest, look, a Democrat, they know this nationally. Democrats have to get 92, 93% of the black vote. Barack Obama got 98. That's why he was president twice. Donald Trump's going to get 10, 15% of the black vote. There aren't enough votes out there left if Democrats give up 10 to 15% for Trump.
What are the chances that I was wearing the same shirt when we did that interview like 2 weeks ago as I'm wearing right now? How weird. 10 to 15%. I don't know what the record is, like the most votes that Republicans have gotten from African American voters. I don't know, but that's probably it. I know in 2016, Trump got 8% of the black vote, and that was still more than Romney or McCain. So you double that, triple that in 2020, that is a complete game changer for Democrats. And right now, Trump's approval rating among black voters is in the 30s. So 10 to 15% of voters, I don't think that's out of the question at all. I think Jesse's right. So why is approval rating so high? Low unemployment, income gains, working class, blue collar wages going up. Criminal justice reform is a big one. But one of the biggest, school choice. I believe the biggest policy disconnect, and we talked about this yesterday when we talked with the guy from the Manhattan Institute about school choice and charter schools, and how many low-income people support it, and Democrats are vehemently against it. So I believe school choice is one of the two issues, but that is the biggest disconnect between black voters and the Democratic Party. So first, it's school choice. Almost all black voters are support of school choice. And the Democrats, the unions, are vehemently against it. It makes no sense whatsoever why you would vote for a Democrat if you're for school choice. Because that has to be a pretty important issue, right? Where you're allowed to send your kids to school. It's a pretty big one. And the second giant disconnect among black voters in particular in the Democratic Party is abortion. Black Democratic Party voters, 1/3 of them say that abortion should be 100% illegal. Illegal, 100%. 1/3 of them. Compare that to white Democratic voters, it's 3%. That's a huge spread right there. Now, here's what happened the other day. The Church of God in Christ, this is a 7 million member black denomination. They passed a resolution here. So there's a bunch of different churches there, the National Baptist Convention, the Progressive National Convention, there's all these different black churches in this group. So they made this proclamation here. Abortion is genocide. Abortion must end to protect the life of the unborn. We oppose elective abortions. The issue of personhood has haunted America since the Dred Scott, Plessy v. Ferguson, and Roe v. Wade decisions. And just as slavery was overturned in America, Jim Crow was defeated, and Nazi Germany was overthrown, it is our prayer that the heinous industry of abortion will become morally reprehensible worldwide. We're very concerned about health and well-being of women. However, the killing of the innocent is not healthcare. That's a pretty strong word, right? That's not holding back at all. So the question is, how many of these leaders, again, this was voted on unanimously, so just the leaders, how many of the leaders of these churches, the people who voted for this, will then go on and vote for Democrats? Democrats who aren't just pro-abortion, but for rapidly expanding abortion access. Did you see that exchange the other day with a voter? It was a pro-life Democrat who asked Pete Buttigieg about, is there a place for me in the party? And basically Buttigieg said, no, there's not. Because in the Democratic Party platform right now, it says abortion should be legal all the way to 9 months. And this woman says that's crazy. And there's no place for me then in the party. And in California now, again, on this point of Democrats wanting to expand abortion access, in California, they're now opening up Planned Parenthood offices in schools, inside the school building. So you have the nurse's office and the Planned Parenthood. They're right there. Now they say they're not going to perform abortions in the school. Like, geez, that would be ridiculous. But surely the people who work there are going to forward the students to their Planned Parenthood abortion centers down the street. And Planned Parenthood's open in poor, usually black neighborhoods, targeting black babies. So let's just think about this like logically for a second. You have a black voter, right? You take a black voter, mom and a dad. They want to send their kid to the best school of their choice, and they're pro-life. But they're going to vote for someone who wants to keep their kids stuck in a failing and dangerous school and expand the killing of black babies. And in some cases, open up a Planned Parenthood in the school, in the failing school. And you're going to, like, that doesn't make any sense at all, especially because those are two extremely important issues. Why else would that mom and dad, who have completely different views on two very, very important things, why else would they vote for a Democrat? Well, they're better at the economy. Democrats are, especially with what we've seen these last 3 years. Only thing the Democrats are better at is giving out welfare. Vox, of all places, has coined this term, the Great Awakening. The Great Awakening. So the idea is that the Democratic Party has become so loco on social issues, and not even social issues, but like transgender, a perfect example of this. So Warren said, this was just yesterday, I think, she said she would only support a secretary of the Department of Education is that the word, secretary? Secretary of Education, right? If a young trans person approved of her choice. I have no idea what she's talking about there. I don't know if she's speaking of like a particular young trans person, or just like she needs one young trans person to sign off on it? I have no idea. But like that's the stuff I'm talking about. Like that's their focus of the Democratic Party today. So if you're a black parent, or any parent, sending your kid to a failing school and you want school choice, are you gonna vote for Elizabeth Warren, whose top priority for the Secretary of Education is their view on transgender bathrooms? The Democrats have more attention focused on what bathroom kids can use than what school kids can use. So most Democrats, especially I think black Democrats, are thinking, what's going on here? What's happening? And the way the Democrats have framed transgender rights as the new civil rights, right? And just talking about prison reform, Elizabeth Warren, when she talks about prison reform, she's talking about transgendered rights of prisoners, like paying all that taxpayer dollars for prisoners to switch genders in prison. Like that's her idea of criminal justice reform. Meanwhile, you have President Trump over here teaming up with Kim Kardashian, not a sentence I've ever said, actually, like, the real actual criminal justice reform. What was that bill called? The Second Chances Bill or something, right? It is so clear that the Democratic Party has been taken over by the woke progressives. They're focusing more on drag queen story hour than jobs. So here's the bottom line. Here's the visual. This is what it means by the Great Awakening. It's a problem for the Democratic Party, and good for Trump. If you lined up everyone in the Democratic Party, right, furthest to the right, so that'd be like more to the middle, or you lined everyone, you literally lined them up. Further to the right, so more towards the middle, more towards the Republican conservative side, you would see more black people and Hispanic people. And the further left you go, the more white it tends to be. And that's where they cater more to transgendered rights and all this other stuff. And if they keep doing that, the Great Awakening, you're gonna have all these people, more conservative Democrats, looking around saying, whoa, what's going on? And they're gonna start to question everything again. And when they're told that Trump's so horrible, so evil, so terrible, they're gonna look at Trump and be like, not really. 10 to 15%. I agree with Jesse. Bank on it. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I want to follow up on something we did last week. Remember we played these clips from Jordan Peterson. He was he was on some TV show, and someone in the audience asked him about climate change, and it's such a problem, and I can only do so much, so we need big, grand action from governments and world governments in order to solve this huge problem. What do you think about that, Jordan Peterson? And we played the first part of his answer, but we never broke down the second part of his answer, so here it is.
If a young person believes that the climate, the global warming problem on the climate is something that needs to be tackled quickly, and they can't wait until they grow up and become prime ministers to do it, do you think collective responsibility overrides individual responsibility in a huge issue like that?
No.
Okay.
I don't. Okay. I think generally people have things that are more within their personal purview that are more difficult to deal with and that they're avoiding, and that generally the way they avoid them is by adopting pseudo-moralistic stances on large-scale social issues so that they look good to their friends and their neighbors.
Oh, that's so good. God, I love that quote. I love that quote so much. Can we print that right here? Gosh, that's so good. People have things in their personal purview that are more difficult to deal with and that they're avoiding, and that their way of avoiding them, the problems in their life, is by adopting pseudo-moralistic stances on large-scale social issues. We talked earlier about transgenderism and global warming. On large-scale social issues, so that they look good to their friends and their neighbors. Man! So the question is there anything in your life that you're avoiding dealing with? Lest we continue just to mock that poor girl who asked the original question. That's not the point. We need to self-reflect. Is there anything in your life that you're avoiding dealing with? The chapter in his book, 12 Rules of Life, it's set your house, in perfect order before you criticize the world. Here's the go-to story of this, the ultimate story. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He was thrown in a Soviet labor camp. This guy lived a pretty crazy life. Served as a soldier on the Russian front lines against the Nazis. After the war, he was arrested, beaten, thrown in prison. Then he got cancer while in prison. So how's your life going compared to this so far? He had every reason to be bitter and resentful, didn't he? He got hit by Hitler and Stalin. Lived in the worst conditions imaginable. Saw his friends and his loved ones killed around him. But he saw people still, in the midst of it all, behave nobly. How can that be? How can that be? In the prison camp, in the gulag. How could anyone think straight, let alone act right in these conditions? And it's because he asked himself the ultimate question. He said, how have I, in the prison, he said, how have I personally contributed to the catastrophe of my life? And you're thinking, no. These things couldn't be his fault. They couldn't be his fault that he's there. Just like it's not my fault, the situation in my life right now. Here's what Peterson said. He considered his whole life in the time there. He had plenty of time in the camps to do that, right? How had he missed the mark in the past? How many times had he acted against his own conscience, engaging in actions that he knew to be wrong? How many times had he betrayed himself and lied? You see the point here? It's not look at all these people, look how terrible they are. It's man, how many times have I betrayed myself and have I lied? Was there any way his past could be rectified and atoned for in the muddy hell of the Soviet gulag? I heard one person said that Solzhenitsyn treated the gulag like he was in a meditation retreat. This is Peterson, he took himself apart piece by piece while his world around him was taken apart piece by piece. Unbelievable self-reflection. Then he wrote the Gulag Archipelago, and here's where Peterson wraps it up. Banned in the USSR, it was smuggled into the West in the 70s, burst upon the world. His writing utterly and finally demolished the intellectual credibility of communism. One man's decision to change his life, instead of cursing fate or climate change, like that woman who asked the question, or capitalism, or the white man, or I think the woman in that original question asked about the shaky job market or whatever. No, didn't blame any of that nonsense. Instead of cursing fate, he shook the whole pathological system of communist tyranny to its core because he made the decision to change his life. And that's why Peterson's ultimate point is if you cannot bring peace to your household, how dare you try to rule a city? Do the work. Do the work on yourself before you go trying to change the world. This is famed social philosopher and MMA fighter Conor McGregor before one of his fights.
And if each one of us put in the work that we know we should do, we know what the work is we need to do, it's just sometimes you don't do it. You know, and then you know when you say, okay, I gotta do this, and you know you gotta do it, and then you don't do it. That's like a mini defeat. And then those add up, and then your lack of interest to go do it actually wanes, and then you can get injured and all this type of thing. So for me, it's just about recognizing what needs to be done and do it strictly and do it. And that for me leads me to enjoy it more. That's basically what happened this camp. So
do the work. Do the work. Stop trying to look good to your friends and neighbors. And do the work on yourself and on your family. And the end result will be looking good to your friends and your neighbors. I want to come back. There's one more lesson from Kobe Bryant's life that I think is really important what we're talking about. And it's about focusing on the process, not the outcome. We'll do that next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. I want to talk a little more about Kobe. I had my men's group the other day, Bible group, and 10 of us, super accomplished, high-achieving, amazing men. And they were all, and I don't even think any of them were real basketball fans necessarily, but they were all still, I don't want to say broke up about it, but it definitely affected them pretty deeply. And me too. And I don't want to just let some of these lessons go. So a couple clips I want to play here. This is about, this is a clip of Kobe talking about why he flew in helicopters a lot.
You know, after school activities, all that fun stuff, even on weekends. But then traffic started getting really, really bad, right? And I was sitting in traffic and I wound up missing like a school play because I was sitting in traffic. And this thing just kept mounting. I had to figure out a way where I could still train and focus on the craft, but still not compromise family time. And so that's when I looked into helicopters and be able to get down and back in 15 minutes. And that's when it started. And so my routine was always the same. Weights early in the morning, kids to school, fly down, practice like crazy, do my extra work, media, everything I needed to do, fly back, get back in carpool line, pick the kids up. And my wife was like, listen, I can pick them up. I'm like, no. I want to do that because like, you know, you have road trips and times where you don't see your kids, man, you know? So like every chance I get to see them and spend time with them, even if it's 20 minutes in the car, like I want that.
Now, he's rich, so he can afford to fly around in helicopters for his commute. But the point I really want to point out here is that look how he prioritized his family, right? And wasn't willing to compromise family time. Like, no, I'm going to pick up the kids. Dad, I'm the dad, I'm going to pick up the kids because every moment is precious. There's a video of Tracy McGrady going around, and in the beginning of the video, he tells the story of how Kobe told him that he wanted to die young. I'm not sure why. I wish we'd get more information on like what Kobe's thoughts were about why he wanted to do that. But what's not getting a lot of attention is what Tracy McGrady said a couple seconds later in the second part of the video here.
And when I got the news yesterday, I had a dance with my daughter yesterday at my wife's event, and they came and told me the news, and I just couldn't believe it, just like everybody else. But I'm devastated.
Did you catch that? He was at a dance with his daughter. You know, there's the stereotype of the absent black father, and there's data to show its prevalence. But let's not forget all the dads, black, white, whatever color, I hate even talking about color, all the dads who are amazing dads and amazing dads to their daughters. The other day, there was a hashtag on Twitter, girl dad. I'm not much of a hashtag guy, right? But this was a good one. This one was really encouraging to scroll through. Dads posting pictures of their daughters, celebrating their relationships, and the relationship between a man and his girls. That's pretty special. Rapper T.I., he wrote this great message to his daughters. It's long, but just part of it, he said, I love you girls more than my vocabulary will allow me to express. You've grown so much right before my very eyes and blossomed into strong, independent young women. I'm so proud of you both, and I love you to no end, more than you ever know. He goes on gushing over his girls, posted a bunch of pictures. Now, I'm sure we could find some lyrics of some songs from T.I. in the past that are less than respectful to women. But hopefully having daughters has changed his ways in that regard. But if out of this whole Kobe tragedy, if men are inspired to be better, more present, active, and engaged and loving fathers to their sons and daughters, then that's a good thing. And that will by far be the most important thing of Kobe Bryant's legacy. So again, I had my Bible group the other day, and these men were, again, deeply affected by this. And I didn't expect it, but if you think about it, it makes sense. So first, the obvious one is life is short. But the bigger thing is reprioritizing your life. So I say all this just to say, if you're having these thoughts as well, of like, man, like, I need to make some changes or whatever, you're not alone. You're not alone. Go with it. Go with those thoughts. And if I may, reprioritize family. Two more quick thoughts here before we get to our guest. He wrote a letter in 2016, Kobe Bryant did. It was right after he retired, and he wrote a letter to his 17-year-old self. It's really good, and just read the whole thing. But one point he made was to invest in your friends and family. Don't give, invest in them. Big difference. Here's what he said. He said purely giving material things to your siblings and friends may appear to be the right decision. You love them, and they were always there for you growing up. So it's only right that you should share and that they should share in your success and all that comes with it. So you buy them a car, a big house, pay all their bills. You want them to live a beautiful, comfortable life, right? Again, this is Kobe writing to his 17-year-old self. But the day will come when you realize that as much as you believed you were doing the right thing, you were actually holding them back. You will come to understand that you were taking care of them because it made you feel good. Wow. Because it made you happy to see them smiling without a care in the world. And that was extremely selfish of you. Gosh, I love those pauses of reflection. Like you think you're doing the right thing and you think you're doing it for selfless reasons, but as we say all the time, perhaps the opposite is true. And here's Kobe saying, no, man, you're doing it for selfish reasons. You're not selflessly giving, you're selfishly giving. Amazing. While you were feeling satisfied with yourself, you were slowly eating away at their own dreams and ambitions. Always think, see, someone years ago told me this on the radio show. I forget the exact context, but it had to do with kids. Always think when you're being given something, what that person or just generally is being taken away from you. If you're being giving something, what's also being taken away from you? Or if you give something to someone, what are you also robbing them of? That was the word she used. What are you robbing them of at the same time? Wow, you were adding material things to their lives, but you were subtracting, robbing, the most precious gifts of all, independence and growth. Invest in their future, don't just give. Pretty good. So we can make political points here. I already talked about the Democratic Party and welfare and entitlements and how many people that we've talked to on the radio show over the years, and we're going to continue to do so on the TV show here. There's a great charity in town called San Diego, called Solutions for Change. And they have this great program for families who are homeless, and it's a 1,000-day program, and it's amazing. Great success. And lots of other charities too, where you live all over the place. But we've talked to people who've gone through this program, and I ask them every time, they talk about their years on welfare and how it crushed them, how it absolutely ruined their lives because it kept them dependent on it and reliant on it and just stuck in the welfare churn for decades. And it was only when people invested in them, as opposed to giving, which welfare does, but invested in them at Solutions for Change, for instance, that they could get, and really when they could invest in themselves, that they could get out of their poverty and get back on the right track. And it's interesting that the same phenomenon that happens with low-income people in the welfare churn also happens with super rich people and their kids, right? Athletes and their millions. I think it's the Kevin Hart documentary, right? We watched a little bit of that. I watched the whole thing. But the Kevin Hart documentary talks about giving his kids the world and how much he wants to. But he also knows he's potentially ruining their lives, making them weak and entitled at the same time. Same principle applies. So I'm not sure how relevant, I don't know how many billionaires are watching right now, right? And you may be overspoiling your family members with your trappings and your billions. But for all of us, it's worth considering how we're raising our kids, how you're raising your kids, and maybe giving too much to your kids with the best of intentions, and maybe giving too much to your kids thinking you're being selfless. Give a pause, because maybe you're actually being selfish. You think you're helping your kids, and you might actually be robbing them of what they really need. Ooh. Last lesson from Kobe. He's known for being the hardest worker, right? Practice starts at 7, he gets there at 5, that kind of stuff. Of all the accolades, he said his dream growing up was not the accomplishments. He said the dream was the process. He said those times when you get up early, those times when you stay up late, when you're too tired, when you don't want to push yourself, but you do it anyway. That's a quote. He said that is actually the dream. And that's an awesome concept. It's ancient wisdom. And it's an old debate. What's more important, process or outcome? I think our modern world today, certainly our entitled world, says outcome is the most important thing. And we want it now. But I would argue that process is more important, because it's what you can control. You can't control the outcome. In Kobe's case, he can't control the people who vote for MVP. He can't control the Hall of Fame voters. He can't control the other team and how well they're training in the Olympics or whatever, right? But the thing you can control is if you get out of bed and go to practice every morning, and how hard you train when you're there, and how you encourage your teammates, and what kind of leader you are. Those are 100% in your control. And that's all process. And how you do those things refines your character, and then therefore defines you as a person. That's process. And as Kobe said, that's the dream. Not the championships. The process is the dream. Fifth grade teacher. Oh, gosh, I forget her name, but I can picture her perfectly. Started with K. I remember this moment perfectly. She gave me some advice. And by advice, I mean I threw a rock at some kid's head, and I was getting in trouble. And she said, the most important thing in life is your reputation. I remember that. And I'm thinking, I get it, but you can't control your reputation. So how can the most important thing in life be something you have no control over? You can control your character. And today, kids especially, but all of us, we feel like we're entitled to success right now. And a lot of that is we're just too outcome-based. We got to focus on the process. The outcome will come. The process is the dream. Love that line. So, in conclusion, consider a reprioritization of family. 2, invest in others. Don't give. Consider what you might be robbing from someone when you give, and focus on process, not outcome. Thanks, Kobe. Our friend Rob Henderson is going to be here next. True story. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back. I want to get to a friend of the show, Rob Henderson. We quote him all the time because luxury beliefs has become a term on the show we use often, if not once a week probably. But his genius doesn't end there. He's a doctoral candidate at Cambridge University. Rob, how are you, brother?
Good, Mike. How are you?
Good. Came across your, first of all, let's talk about your newsletter. What's your newsletter about? I want people to sign up for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So my newsletter is about human nature. I specifically get into things like intelligence, personality, sex differences between men and women, dating culture, just anything that I'm reading about, things that I'm interested in, politics, things like that. But from a more sort of psychological and sociological perspective, meant for a general audience, just for a curious reader.
Love it. Sign up. And I want to talk today about the sex differences and dating. So that was your newest article about in Quillette. What started this before we get to the ultimate point here?
Yeah, so a few months ago, I read this book called Datanomics by this guy called John Berger. And the whole book is basically how, among the educated class, there's this huge gender imbalance among men and women. What this means basically is that more women are graduating from college than men. And this is creating problems in the dating market for educated women because they don't have enough male partners. And this is leading to interesting sort of cultural tensions now as women compete for a shrinking number of, sort of professionally successful men.
Tell us about how, so on a college campus, and it's way imbalanced, right? Isn't it like for every 100 men, it's like 130 women are getting college degrees? It's like very, very imbalanced, right?
Right. It's something like, about 133 women for every 100 men. And so, what this means is that there's 33% more women. 3 women for every 2 men are graduating from college now. And so, this is creating a lot of competition among women. It's creating a lot of stress for them, too. And on the flip side of this, you're finding that men are becoming more and more reluctant to commit simply because they have more options. So, I mean, a lot of that book, for example, Datanomics, John Berger interviews a lot of people in New York City, and he finds that men in New York, especially educated, successful men, they don't want to settle down. Why would they settle down? They have all these options because educated men can date educated women, but also they can date less educated women. Less educated women don't have a problem dating educated men, as you can imagine. And so these men have lots of options, and this is creating frustration for educated women.
The part of the article I had to read like 5 times, and I had to really visualize this because it seemed like the opposite of what I thought would happen. What dynamic change of behavior, what behavioral change results from having more women than men on campus? How does it change how people behave sexually?
Right. And so basically, when there are more women than there are men, you actually get, research indicates that you actually get more of a hookup culture on campuses simply because when there is, say, a surplus of women or a shortage of men, more women are competing for these men, and they're more willing to adapt their behavior into what men prefer in order to get with those men. And on average, this isn't always the case, but on average, men tend to prefer more casual relationships, more short-term relationships, one-night stands, sort of more hookup culture. And so as colleges become more imbalanced in favor of women, this is in part where hookup culture is coming from. These women are sort of getting anxious. There aren't that many men for them, so they're willing to sort of become a little bit more relaxed in their standards and do things that they otherwise wouldn't do in order to get with men.
Wow, that's so interesting. So say this exact same thing, but flip it around. So let's say there was a college with way more men and fewer women. What would happen?
Yeah, and so it would be basically the reverse. So men would be competing for a smaller number of women, and they would be more willing to adapt to the preferences of women. And on average, women tend to prefer more longer-term relationships, more emotional investment. They prefer going on dates and so on. And so men are more willing to wait to sort of do what women want in order to be with them. And this actually happens. So if you look at campuses, say like Sarah Lawrence, which used to be a female college, but in the last few decades, they've started to let men in, but it's still a huge imbalance, way more women. You see there's much more of a hookup culture. Women are more frustrated with the dating scene there. And then if you look at schools like Caltech, where there's a lot of men there relative to women, there's more of a dating culture, more relationships form. Women, on average, tend to be more satisfied with the sort of dating life there.
Wow, how interesting. So I want to bridge into this one section here you have about gaming and pornography, which I think are maybe certainly pornography, and there's an argument to be made for dating, probably two of the most, how would you word it? Damaging, that's putting it nicely. Things to men, the male psyche, the male soul, and therefore relationships as well. So how does this play into the college campus culture and beyond campus, beyond college too?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think those two things are, in some sense, and there's the Stanford psychologist Phil Zimbardo. He argues this in his book too. The Demise of Guys is the title of the book. He argues that basically porn and video games are hijacking men's natural instincts, their tendencies for, on the one hand, accomplishment, achievement, doing things to build their skill set and to sort of, in a sense, level up. And on the other hand, you have porn here, which basically hijacks the sort of male drive to be with women. and it sort of satiates that desire to have sex, essentially. And so, in the real world, what a man would typically traditionally do is, go to school, work really hard, get a good job, and hopefully try to make something of himself to impress a woman who might want to be with him. But video games and porn are basically replacing these two things. They get their sort of satisfaction of, oh, I'm accomplishing something, in this game world. And then, oh, lots of women want to be with me in this sort of internet fantasy. And so this is creating, I think, a lot of problems for relationships and dating, simply because more men are dropping out. Interestingly, if you look at some of the survey reports, these young men who are mostly in their 20s report that their sense of well-being and their happiness is roughly the same as men who aren't doing these kinds of things, who are working and have girlfriends and so on. But one thing that we mentioned in that article is we don't know if that's always going to be the case. As these men get older, into their 30s and 40s, are they going to be satisfied playing games and living with their parents? I'm not sure.
Yeah, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, I'm so grateful for that because I feel like men, young men, college men, my advice to them would be is to cut those two things out and truly work on yourself and work on your relationships. Because you've so clearly identified the problem, and I feel like men who cut that out can choose their own destiny. It's it's like a superpower now because you've actually worked on yourself and you've worked on your relationships. You didn't short circuit it and try to shortcut it and hack it. Gosh, that's so good. This is, Rob, you're not in our world today, we're not supposed to talk about sex differences. That's one of the progressive things, that we're all the same. One of the feminist lies is that we all should be the same. And also that women don't need men and all this stuff. So you're in some pretty taboo area right here. How do you approach this topic in general?
Yeah. I mean, we tried to be quite careful with our writing of that piece. We try to caveat it and stick as much to the research as possible. And so that's the way I tend to handle things that tend to be controversial or taboo, is to actually look at the research, look at the literature. This is something that frustrates me a lot with, the sort of modern social movements and political correctness. So much of it actually goes against the research. I mean, if you actually take a look at data on how men and women actually behave, what their preferences are, what they want out of life, there are these big differences in how they behave and the things that they want. And I think that's perfectly fine to discuss, because if we want to increase the amount of happiness, we actually have to look at what people want, what they truthfully say that they desire, instead of sticking to some narrative where everyone is exactly the same.
What happens when we ignore the differences?
I think that we, for example, see things like what's going on in dating for educated people. You see a lot of educated women who are getting older and are wondering, they say things like, where are all the good men? Where are all these men? And, one reason why there aren't that many men is because we're pretending like everyone is exactly the same. But in our culture today, you're seeing that more women are going to college. The sort of school system seems to be structured in favor of women. There's a lot of promotion of getting more women and girls into, advanced education programs and so on. And there's not much attention being paid to boys and men. And that could be one way that we could help women, in a sense, by getting more men into universities, getting men to shape themselves into desirable partners.
Wow, that's such the opposite, right? I mean, I don't want to blame feminists necessarily, but it's like women, we need more women in college, more women in college, more women in college and that would be better for women. And you're saying it may be better for women if we have more men in college.
Right. Yeah. And this isn't to say we shouldn't let women into college or anything like that.
Sure.
But maybe we should pay attention to what's going on with men and to help them sort of, become desirable partners for these women.
Wow, good. All right, I got one last question for you, because you mentioned happiness. So I'm reading Hacking the American Mind, and the beginning of the book is about the difference between pleasure and happiness. And he defines happiness more as contentment. And then I've been perusing a little bit of some Roger Scruton, and he wrote this great article back in 2013 about contentment, or pleasure and happiness as well. So happiness is tough to define and all that. But so how do you define it, and/or what is the ultimate goal? What should we be seeking for, searching for, working towards as we try to better our society?
Right. Yeah, that's I mean, one of the big difficult questions, and even a lot of established sort of psychologists and philosophers haven't really been able to pinpoint that. But one sort of approach that I like is from Viktor Frankl. He wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He was a psychiatrist, survived the Holocaust, and wrote a bunch of books about meaning and so on. And in that book, Man's Search for Meaning, he says meaning only comes, or rather happiness only comes as a byproduct of doing things for other people, for helping other people, for sort of doing things for those that you love. And happiness will only come as a side effect of that. If you seek happiness, you won't actually get it. So seek meaning first, and where meaning comes in is usually by improving the lives of those that you care about.
The theme of the show today has been to focus on process over outcome. And it seems like that is a perfect way to end it. Rob, how do we sign up for your newsletter?
Yeah, you can just go to my Twitter. So it's at Rob K. Henderson. And yeah, it's right there in my bio. And I post all kinds of interesting stuff there too. So yeah.
Okay. Rob K. Henderson. And then the Quillette article, you can find it there and everything too. So make sure you follow Rob. Rob Henderson, great to talk to you, brother. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
Thanks, man. Enjoy the Super Bowl. We'll see you on Monday. Spread the word.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks.